Every car engine ever explained, one cylinder. Starting off with the simplest piston engine ever made, the single cylinder engine is exactly as it sounds, one cylinder. The single cylinder is its own engine configuration because by definition it cannot be an inline, V-shaped or W or whatever because it doesn't have multiple cylinders arranged to make the other configurations. So therefore please don't call it a V1, I1. I hear I1 a lot. It is not an I1 because how can you call, like, think of inline skates. If I just give you a wheel and put it on the bottom of your foot, that's not an inline skate because it's just one wheel. You have one wheel, you have a Healy. You have a Healy, if that even. We call inline skates because they have multiple wheels in line with each other. So using that example, that's why inline engines are called inline engines, but a single cylinder is called single cylinder still. Single one is fine. Thumper is also an alternative. Despite being the first piston engine ever created, they are far from extinct. And while it is certainly rare for any modern car to make use of single cylinder engines, they are still widely used for private transportation and personal use by the rest of the world, which predominantly uses motorbikes. The most sold vehicle to date is still the single-cylinder Honda Super Cub with well over 120 million units sold. In fact, there are several motorcycles that outsell the highest sold car ever. And I hope that really puts into perspective how little the rest of the world uses cars for personal transit. Whether it's a Vespa or a Royal Enfield, many commuter-styled scooters or motorcycles used globally are single-cylinder engines. The main advantages of a single cylinder is how easily they can achieve an excess of 100 miles per gallon due to their simplicity, low weight, and efficiency. They do have a very noticeable downside, which you can probably guess, is that they're not very good at high RPM power output because it's very difficult to balance a single piston on its own because there's no other pistons present to cancel out its vibration. So as a result, single cylinders have found and dominated their niche, simple engines meant for commuter vehicles. The Royal Enfield in particular is around 20-ish to 25-ish horsepower. I own one personally, gets over 100 miles per gallon. Love the bike, looks great. Personally, I like the thump of Royal Enfield specifically. Never a huge fan of some scooter engines. I do know that they can sound like lawnmowers. The movement of its piston is perpendicular with the ground, which results in it thumping and shaking the ground beneath it. Pretty gentle. I have a cam in mind. This is what it sounds like. I think it's pretty cool personally. Inline engines, also known as straight engines, but don't let Twitter hear you calling it that. The inline engine gets their name from the cylinders being arranged in a line. The main advantage of this layout is its ease of production since it only has one crankshaft running down the entire length of the engine, and adding another cylinder is as simple as copy and pasting another one from the block. Its main advantage is that it is one of the smoothest and easiest to balance engine layouts, where even odd number layouts like 3 and 5 cylinders can thrive. The 6-cylinder and 4-cylinder variants meanwhile are the most common inline engines that we'll usually see. Don't ever let your mom tell you that nothing in the world is perfect because mathematically the inline 6 is actually perfect, being the most perfectly balanced engine in existence. They're both balanced horizontally and vertically, resulting in the most buttery smooth power delivery and acceleration feel of any other engine ever created. The inline 4 meanwhile is mostly balanced while still being very affordable, which is why every economy car ever decides to make use of it. There was a time where we used to make even larger inline engines like inline 8s, but what ultimately did straight 8s in was just how long they are. So basically you have something that takes up the same space as a V16 engine, but only being half of a V16 and less than half of the performance. That doesn't take away the historical significance of us originally making these. I think they're super lovely long boys. I mean, just look at these phallic mother truckers. But yeah, try imagining fitting one of these inside of modern day parking spaces. Now, of course, if length isn't a concern, theoretically you can just keep adding cylinders at the end of an inline engine because mathematically an inline 9, 10, and so on can just be balanced just as properly for the most part. As a result, the inline engine actually holds the world record for being the largest displacement engine in the world, and really just the largest engine in general, is an inline 14 that is used by a ship, and it's at 1,820 liter engine. Just kidding, that's actually per cylinder. It's actually 25,480 liters. So for the Americans watching, here's a better metric that you're gonna understand. It can fit 3,640 Corvette Z06 LS7 engines. Ain't that some freedom units? Also, if you're interested in these super quirky engine layouts, make sure to subscribe, and more importantly, check out my shorts. To all the car guys who are constantly asking where the car content went, if you haven't watched my shorts yet, then you're absolutely missing out. Please go check them out. I've got a ton of videos on these funny little engines that I find throughout history, as well as other just funny car stuff. V-type engines. The V-type configuration is the most iconic style of multi-cylinder engine. Like most engine types featured in this video, it gets its name from the shape that it makes, more specifically, the shape they make when viewed along their crankshaft. But that's not going to stop people from calling their inline 4 Honda's manifold a V4. Seriously, that's not the V we're talking about. That's not anywhere near the crankshaft, so please stop calling these V4 engines. The V-type engine is more compact than an inline layout, but for most cars, they have enough space where they can still fit 4 or 5 cylinders in line. It's only until when you hit 6 cylinders do a lot of manufacturers start making the choice of going V6 or inline 6, both of which are great engines. Now the reason motorcycles will still use V4s, unlike cars where no active production car uses one, is because motorcycles actually do care about the compactness of having two cylinders versus 1, 2, 3, 4. So they'll go to the extra effort of all that extra engineering. Popular V-type layouts include V2s, also called V-twins, V4s, V6s, V8s, V10s, V12s, V16s, V18s, V20s, and V24s. Why did we skip over 3, 5, 7, 9, 14, and 22? Well, for the odd numbers, we skip them because V-types have 2 cylinder banks unlike the single banked inline. This means that V-types will work best if they have an even number cylinder layout because they obviously want the same amount of cylinders on each cylinder bank. Yes, you could make odd number V layouts like the V3 and V5, but they'll never be balanced as properly. However, because it's also a super small cylinder count still, they can kind of get away with not being perfectly balanced, which is why some manufacturers like Honda will still make them. Now, when it comes to numbers like 14 and 22, mathematically, these numbers are significantly more difficult to balance, and trust me, this time the consumers will notice because it will vibrate their teeth out. That's how hard it is to balance these engines. These two numbers, for very drastically oversimplified purposes, do not divide evenly into 360 or 720, and these both represent 2-stroke and 4-stroke. Is essentially going to make a ton of vibrations, and this can obviously affect performance, comfort, and reliability. That's not to say that V14s don't exist. We do put them in massive ships because they don't care about vibrations because they're a lot heavier than a car, and they're also floating in water, which helps dampen the vibrations. Of course, for cars that are much smaller than a ship and also driving on land, a V14 powered car would probably rumble people's teeth out. V engines are perhaps the most diverse sounding engine, mostly due to the fact that they're just so popular, so you'll find any variation of a V engine from basically every single manufacturer in the world. These various angles that these 2-cylinder banks can be arranged in can actually drastically change the sound of their engine. For example, here's a 45-degree American V-twin. Sounds noticeably different from a 90-degree Italian V-twin. This is in spite of them all using the same cylinder count. This can also further be changed by the type of crankshaft they use, like cross-plane V8s versus flat-plane V8s, a very popular example being like older Corvettes versus modern Ferraris. The V-type engine's main advantage is that it's likely the most compatible engine layout for any sort of forced induction. That's why you see a lot more twin-turbo V8s or supercharged V8s, as while you can still twin-turbo an inline engine, it's usually better to just do one big turbo for them because they only have 1 cylinder bank. But before I get carried away yapping about forced induction, I actually do want to show you what I'm talking about using my Minecraft build. So as you can see here, the V-type engine has 2 cylinder banks that are split apart. If you look at the very top of them, you'll see their intake manifold, and this will usually be replaced by the supercharger if you decide to place a supercharger. So superchargers will sit nice and neatly between the 2 cylinder banks, allows for fantastic cooling. You could even put an intercooler on top of it, so it's a very efficient layout. If you choose to twin turbo V-type engines, then as you see here, we have 2 separate header systems for each exhaust scavenging on each side. So each cylinder bank has their own set of headers essentially, so just don't worry about the technical jargon, just physically look with your eyes. Here's the V shape, here's the two headers, here's the intake. Now you know air come in here, air combust here, air come out here. So as the air comes out from the side, you can add turbos on either side. So manufacturers have gotten really smitten with the V-type engines as of recent because as emission regulations get stricter, turbos and superchargers are usually something they turn to subvert past those laws, and V-types have been their go-to. Moving on, we have the W engine, and the W engine is kind of weird. No, that's not why they're called Ws, but it may as well be, since modern W engines don't actually resemble the letter W. Let me explain. So the originator of this name comes from a 3-bank design in the early 1900s that if you do stare at it from the crankshaft, just like with the V-types we talked about, it does actually create the letter W shape, hence the name. Now, Porsche is currently designing a concept for a 3-bank true W engine that will feature a whopping 18 cylinders, but because it's not currently produced yet, I can't use it when referring to modern W engine. Regarding a lot of modern W engines that actually have been produced and currently exist in this world, not as a concept, the Volkswagen W8, W12, as well as the Bugatti W16 are weird in the sense that they resemble more of a chunky V shape when viewed along their crankshaft instead of the iconic W shape. The most overused and absolute false piece of information that used to circulate on millennial car YouTube is that the Bugatti's W16 is actually just two V8s that were combined together, and this is completely wrong. It's totally false. It's actually just a really chunky and staggered VR configuration, so it's not two V8s that are put next to each other or welded together like everyone makes it sound like. Let's just go back to Minecraft again. So to better visualize the differences between the 3 and 4-bank designs, here in the 3-bank design, as you can see, it makes a very recognizable W shape. So when we look at the 4-bank that I've built here, you can see that it actually just looks like a very chunky V when you view it along the crankshaft. And if we take the cylinder heads off, we can actually see the cylinders underneath are staggered, making it more of two conjoined VR engines. And unironically, if these Minecraft builds are helping you guys better visualize the engine shape, let me know if you appreciate them. I know for a lot of newer car enthusiasts and non-car viewers who somehow stumbled on this video, you may have heard these letters and engine configs your whole life, but never actually knew what people were referencing when they said V4, V8, or Inline 6, or W16, or so and so forth. So these builds, I completely remove all the excess intake, exhaust, electricals, cables, fuel lines, and all the other routing that usually obscures the view of an engine. For example, if I told a non-car person to look at a Mustang's engine bay and tell me why it's called a V8, they probably wouldn't be able to find the V shape because understandably, with all the stuff on it, it doesn't really look like a V until you take all the stuff off and you go, oh, that is a V. So I'm hoping that these oversimplified builds give like a good representation, and also it's just for audience retention because I hate to say it, I think more people these days are probably more familiar with like Minecraft than with like actual engine pictures, so this probably helps in that way too. Anyways, since we are talking a lot about VR designs, I gotta talk about them, don't I? VR engines. So what happens if an inline engine refuses to grow another cylinder bank and become a full V-type engine? Well, you get the VR layout. It's a staggered cylinder design that mixes both aspects of inline and V-shape engines with double the benefits. I'm straight up kidding because it actually performs more similarly to the forgotten middle child who's sandwiched between their overachieving older sibling and their super adorable younger sibling. They remain forgotten to time, unloved, and even disowned by the family. Regarding VRs, even Papa Volkswagen has finally disowned their design in late 2024. VR engines struggle to have the ease of maintenance, low cost of production, and perfect balancing that their inline brothers have. They also aren't as receptive to forced induction as their V-type brothers are. The only reason we made them in the first place is in a world where forced induction didn't become as popular as it has and emissions didn't get as strict as they did, the VR engine actually makes a lot of sense. When it comes to just naturally aspirated power, meaning no turbos, no superchargers, no forced induction, the VR design is actually basically almost as compact as an inline engine, but it makes the same power of a V engine of NA equivalent. Now, if you do add forced induction, you can still turbo and supercharge a VR, and while I do admire the hell out of the engineering feat that this accomplishment is, factually speaking, we just have to talk about the numbers because the power just isn't as good relative to a twin turbo V6 with probably double or even triple the horsepower when pushed at its limits, while still having less complexity, better reliability, and more fuel economy. So when you think about it from manufacturer perspectives, V-types are cheaper to make, and when you think about it from consumer perspective, V-types are cheaper to maintain. And when you think about it from the lawmaker's perspective, V-types are also more easy to get emissions friendly. So the VR engine wasn't wrong for existing, it just came with an advantage in a world that no longer really needed that advantage, so to speak. But just like most unloved middle children, it's only till after their tragic passing do we realize that they were actually the ones holding the family together like glue right down the middle. The VR engine walked, so its W16 Bugatti brother could run. Fly high VR engines, you will be missed. L-type engines. If there are W engines, then you can bet that there also must be an absolute L as well. Unlike what their name would imply regarding the shape, these do not have a cylinder that is longer than the other, but rather they are just a 90-degree angled V-type engines. So it's basically just the V engine that's laying on one of its sides. So anytime you hear someone say L-type engine or like an L-twin or whatever, they're just referring to this because I'll be brutally honest here. Look, this video is confusing enough with the whole W's not always being W-shaped and VRs not actually having a V or an R shape. So having L's just not even actually be L's and actually just being V's that are on their side, you know, I'm trying to make this super approachable for non-car enthusiasts. So for the love of God, can we just get back to engine names that actually make sense again? Praise be the X engine. The X engine is indeed in the shape of an X. This time I won't need an oversimplified Minecraft build because the real life X types are so obviously X shaped that there is no way that the most non-car, non-car-y, carless carer could ever mistake it for anything else, because you absolutely are seeing the letter X here if you have functioning eyeballs. The X engine's a good engine, an honest one, a dignified breed. It's also discontinued because of gravity. The X engine usually has one or two cylinder banks facing downwards. Unfortunately, whichever cylinder banks are facing downwards struggle with overheating and need added cooling, which means added components, which means added complexity, which means it's going to cost more for manufacturers to make and also mean it's going to cost more for customers to maintain. So as a result, these never really picked up popularity and haven't been in active production in any production cars for quite some time now. Born too soon to explore space, born too late to explore the world, born just in time to constantly watch piston engines go extinct. Because trust me, there's only going to be more as this video goes on. But damn, do they look so cool. Have you heard one? They sound even cooler too, like straight out of science fiction. It's tragic of how futuristic these things look. They unfortunately are only stuck in the past. Now, some X engines do still exist in the modern world, particularly for some small motorcycles, but for road vehicles, X engines have tried to mitigate their struggle against gravity by flattening themselves out to make reaching them and cooling them a lot easier. But at that point, why not just have a flat engine? F engines, also known as flat engines. These get their name for being, well, flat. They are cylinders that are arranged laying down in the flat position. V-type engines tend to be top-heavy. Meanwhile, inline engines, if they get too high cylinder counts, tend to be too long like we discussed. So when you flatten out engines, you can get high cylinder counts just like a V-type while reducing the cumbersome length like you would suffer from an inline equivalent. As a result, flat engines became the creation of this kind of compromise. But they do have a distinct benefit as well. Their lower center of gravity makes them great engines for track cars like Porsches or for touring motorcycles like Honda Goldwings. Flat engines allow these vehicles to have more corner stability thanks to having their weight closer to the ground. This is really important for track cars because they want less body roll and less pitching and less diving as they constantly speed through the corners, and this is why Porsches have chosen to use flat engines. For huge and touring focused motorcycles, you really learn to appreciate the flat engine's design because unlike a car, you're actually sitting atop of a motorcycle, which means that you, the rider, are responsible for the vehicle's weight and balance. So you absolutely notice the lower center center of gravity more, because you can take two 800-pound motorcycles like a V-twin bagger versus a flat engine bagger, and despite them both being the same weight, you're going to notice how the flat engine bagger will be a lot easier to manage. Anyone who sat on a Honda Goldwing versus a Harley Davidson will attest to this fact. I was really shocked when I sat on Goldwings and even demo rode a few of them that they genuinely feel more like a 600-pound motorcycle, because 200 pounds of the engine just feels like it disappeared into thin air, and that is an engineering marvel. Boxer engines. Boxers are a variant of flat engines, but not vice versa. You've probably heard that all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. This is exactly true for boxer engines. All boxer engines are flat engines, but not all flat engines are boxer engines. Do not mix this up. Do not reverse that phrase. Do not interchangeably switch their terms. They're two different engines, but a boxer is a subcategory of a flat, but a flat cannot be a subcategory of a boxer. So if we use Minecraft once again, you'll see what I mean. So if you look at the movement of these boxer pistons, you'll see that they're punching at each other, kind of boxing. A flat engine, meanwhile, will have the pistons tug together, and this is usually due to them sharing a single crank pin. So watch this area right here in the middle to see what I mean. So if you look at the boxer engine, like I said, they're punching, they're boxing, they're coming together into the center. If you look at the flat engine, you'll see that they're actually on the opposite ends of each other. If one is at the top of stroke, the other piston is at bottom of stroke. So it's almost like they're playing tug of war with each other instead of boxing each other. But tugger doesn't exactly have the same ring as just calling it a flat engine, so that's why they're just called flat engines. But back to boxers. So now that we know the difference, boxer engines are most commonly used by companies like Subaru. They use them in a lot of their cars, most notably the WRX BRZ, but they can also be found in some BMW motorcycles, base model Porsches, and the Toyota GR86, which is just a Subaru collaboration, so it's technically just a Subaru as well. Kinda neat though that we can also name engines on their movement, aside from just naming them based on what they look like. And the main advantage of boxer engines is that they're fan-freaking-tastic for off-road vehicles, because they also have the great low center of gravity. They also have a more unique sound, a more chunky sound compared to a flat engine, whereas a flat engine will have a more sporty sound. This is all just preference at that point. Like, if you choose either a flat or a boxer engine, you are going to get the benefits of a lower center of gravity. Back to letter-named engines though, the H engine. No, your Subaru H4 or H6 is not an H engine, they are boxer engines like we just discussed earlier. We no longer have any active production H engines in any automobile. H is just the name of the internal company designation that Subaru gave those engines. To really drive my point home, Ford calls the code name or internal document designation of the V8 inside the Mustang a Coyote, and I promise you, my Ford Mustang does not have a coyote dog that's inside the engine generating my power. For example, a Corvette engine has neither an L or an S shape in it, so H here is just the code name of the engine, not its actual engine configurations. Subarus have boxer engines. Now that we got that out of the way, H engines get their name for, well, looking like an H. They are basically two flat engines that are laying atop one another and thus forming the letter H. Surprisingly, they are extremely compact, more so than V and even W configurations. We fit H16, yes, that's right, 16 freaking cylinders into tiny little race cars. And wait until I tell you about the H24 engines that we've also made and fit into small planes. Meanwhile, we still struggle to fit V8s and even V10s into most cars, and most non-car people still don't know that V12 Lamborghinis don't actually have trunks anymore because their V12 is so massive, it takes up the entire mid to rear area of the car. V16s as a result are even longer and even rarer. They're currently about to be produced again by Bugatti. Now that we've said that, I hope you understand how impressive it is that an H16 can be so compact and fit that many cylinders into a small space. So why did they get discontinued then? Well, it turns out too much of a good thing can still be a bad thing. If you really think about it, we usually are more than good enough with 6 or 8 cylinders for most cars. 10 and 12 is usually only for exotics. And by the time we do want 16 cylinders, we do have W layouts, or customers just actually accept the fact that the car is going to be a bit quirky, because that might even be part of the desirable purchasing experience of a V16. Basically, we never actually needed something that was this compact, so it was speccing too high into a talent tree that was no longer relevant for the current aren't meta, so I hope that better explains it for the gamers out there. And too much of a good thing, like I said earlier, can still have some bad things following it. Being this compact, it has a very obvious downside, being that it overheats very easily because all of its cylinders are way too close together. It's also really hard to cool them and really hard to wire them and route them and get fuel lines to them and really do anything for them because, again, they're all way too close together. So it's a lot of complexities involved, a lot of really small and really fine-tuned parts need to be manufactured for them. And basically there was way too much complexity involved in such cramped spaces that this negatively affected reliability and of course parts replacing for consumers. As a result, a lot of companies just decided to forgo using them and instead stuck to using V and eventually modern W layouts instead. Anyways, that's it for this video. We finally made it to the end. Just kidding. Oink, oink, psych, psych, mother trucker. Here's the brat monster. It's the Rotary, baby. I gotta stop putting the Rotary at the end of all these videos, but then again, I kind of have to save the best for last for audience retention. I swear if anyone that comments below is asking, but Bladed, where's the Rotary? Reply to them and call them a wankle wanker for not making it to the end of this video before commenting. Much like the Boxer, it's named after the movement instead of the shape, because if we named it after the shape, we would call it a Dorito, and honestly, it's kind of funny. In fact, we do actually call these engines Doritos as like the slang term. So the Rotary engine, believe it or not, is even more compact than the H engine design. And you can probably see where we're about to go with this. So the reason that they're not discontinued. We've made them recently at least, and then Mazda has confirmed to bring them back, but it actually went full circle where, hey, they kind of cooked. So Rotary engines have a few stark weaknesses. The most notable ones being that they're horrendous for emissions, which really pisses off lawmakers, and that they're not that good on miles per gallon, which is disliked by obviously the average everyday commuter. Obviously car guys will put up with less gas mileage, but to actually be successful as a car, you have to obviously sell it to the normal people as well. And they also blow up apex seals. And if you don't know what an apex seal is, just bless your heart. I hope you never have to know. The advantages though is the Rotary is super simple. At the end of the day, it's a little Dorito bouncing around in a chamber, and it is high revving, very compact, like I said, and very lightweight, which are very desirable features for high performance sports cars, which is why we use them for high performance sports cars. And unlike all the other JDM cars to be affected by clout, I'm still laughing at how the entire Mazda RX series is somehow the only one that hasn't shot to the moon, because this gentle parenting broccoli hair generation was not ready to own a Rotary engine that beats more sense into them than the dad that they never had. This is not a car for the weak. This is not an engine for the weak. You have to love the Rotary and it will love you back. If you try to treat it as just a car, then it will treat you as just a wanker, and it's going to proceed to blow itself out of spite until it finds an owner with deep enough pockets and even deeper conviction to put up with it. Circling back to its compactness, what made the Rotary engine still survive to this day over the H engine per se is that it is so ridiculously compact. We now have hybrids. So before hybrids were a thing, this is never something that would have crossed its path normally in the past. But since we're moving towards electrification, we realize, yo, this thing takes up so little space in the engine bay, we can actually hook it up to an electric motor and make it a hybrid engine. And guess what I talked about earlier? The Rotary struggles with MPG and struggles with emissions. Guess what happens when you make it partially hybrid? You can actually pass those emissions and you can actually get better MPG, which is why the Rotary is hanging on by the skin of its teeth and still around to this day. Now, before we close this video out, I do want to mention some honorable mentions. U-type engines. They aren't actually the shape of a U, and it's just two separate inline engines that are next to each other. But unlike the parallel twin layout, they have separate crankshafts, meaning that they're two entirely separate engines. They're just linked to a single drivetrain. So you can probably figure out why these overly complex and underpowered lads did not make it to the modern era. Hybrid engines. Hybrid's a modifier, just like I mentioned with the Rotary. It is not an actual engine configuration. Any engine configuration can be a hybrid. You can make a V-type hybrid, an inline hybrid, a Boxer hybrid, Rotary hybrid, and so on. So this video is about engine configurations, not modifiers. Otherwise, we would talk about turbochargers and superchargers as well, because those also work as modifiers. If you haven't watched my Noob's Guide series, which is basically ancient history on YouTube at this point, I've explained forced induction there. Anyways though, thank you so much for watching this video. This video is a lot longer than I thought it would be. Like this video if you like car engines, share this to your favorite VTuber to react to, and subscribe for more situation updates. I'll see y'all next time. Bladed Angel out.